The New York Giants stand pat at the 2024 NFL trade deadline, but did they make the right decision? I'll tell you what I think coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work, so do check that out. And as always, welcome on into my Blue Crew community members, to my everydayers, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the promo code LockedOnNFL, all in lowercase letters, to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, the NFL trade deadline is done. It is in the books. The Giants not making any deals. We're going to take a look at how things kind of unfolded, why the Giants didn't make the deals, and what's next. What do we expect next? So we're going to break all that down in segments 1 and 2. Then in segment 3, the Giants made what appears to be a surprising transaction earlier during the day. They cut cornerback Nick McLeod. We'll talk a little bit about that and what that means for the team going forward and why they did that. So that's our show for today. Let's get into it. All right. The Giants not active enough at the trade deadline. All right. The two guys that were most likely to be moved in order, Azeez Ojulari and Darius Slayton. Now, let me start with Slayton first. Slayton was a guy that the Giants, I don't think, or I didn't get the sense the Giants really wanted to move because, Slayton is such a key point in that offense of theirs. He's a guy who right now is the better player over Jalen Hyatt, who was really, the guy that I think the Giants maybe were hoping would step up and take the Slayton role in the offense. But there were inquiries for Slayton. I believe the Steelers were looking to they kicked the tires to see what the Giants might want. Joe Schoen, from what I understand, didn't want to settle for like a 7th round pick or even a conditional pick. He wanted something in the neighborhood of the 5th round, from what I understand. All right. So that's not official. That's just, what I've heard. So Slayton, there really wasn't any chance or expectation they were going to move him. The wide receiver market was actually kind of flooded. And the Steelers, as far as I know, they were the only team that really kicked the tires on Slayton. They ended up trading for Mike Williams of the Jets. And I believe they sent, I can't remember if it was a 5th or 6th round pick. I think it might have been a 6th round pick for Mike Williams. So Slayton just wasn't a guy who I think they were serious about moving. Now, Azeez Ojulari, as I have been saying, every time the topic came up, that was a guy they were potentially looking to move. All right. So what happened was with Ojulari, initially you saw Arizona, you saw Detroit and Atlanta all being interested, but the Giants wanted at least a mid-round type of pick. Okay. So like a 4th, I think is what the asking price was for Ojulari, who, as I pointed out on New York Giants on SI, 24 years old, and he's had, far more sacks and has a lot more upside. So Denver traded Baron Browning to the Cardinals, eliminating them as a possibility. The Lions acquired Zadarius Smith, which eliminated them. So that really left Atlanta as the only potential trade partner. If I remember correctly, Atlanta didn't have a 5th round pick. They weren't going to give up a 4th rounder, which is what the asking price for Ojulari is believed to have been. So Joe Schoen just basically holding his water, not settling, and both those guys now, Ojulari and Slayton, will of course finish out their 2024 seasons as members of the Giants. Now, the question is, did they do the right thing? Based on what I'm seeing on my social media on X, some of you say yes, Shane did the right thing. He didn't give the guys away. Some of you are saying, well, what's the difference? They're going to walk away anyhow, and the Giants are going to get nothing. Not necessarily, folks. Let me just start off here with Slayton. All right. If the Giants were gung ho about really keeping Slayton for the long term, wouldn't they have extended him back in the spring when he was looking to be extended, when he had that mini holdout that he had, during the OTAs? Probably would have looked to get something done then. What they did instead, as everybody knows, they gave him a modified contract built with extra incentives in order to basically, smooth things over. There have been no talks that I know of between Slayton's reps and the Giants since about an extension. I don't believe there's going to be talks. I think what the Giants are going to do moving forward is Malik Neighbors is their clear number one. They would like to get Jalen Hyatt at some point in there. Jalen Hyatt's still needing a little bit of work as far as, getting to where they need him to be. And he also maybe would behoove himself if he would add a little bit of muscle, because he's still kind of, thin looking, despite the fact that he hit the weight room this past off season. He did say he put on some muscle, but he's still kind of fragile looking, frail looking, if you will. So he's basically a guy that is still in development. Ojulari now, this is kind of interesting because, people say there's no way the Giants are going to pay for a third pass rusher when they've got Thibodeau, set to make this amount of money, and Brian Burns set to make this amount of money. I don't necessarily agree with that thinking. I say, if the player is good and you want to have a strength, and I've been saying it for as long as I can remember, that with a pass rush, you want to have at least 3 good pass rushers on your team. If you want to run, like a NASCAR package or something like that, or 4 aces, if for those of you who remember Spags, you've got to have extra pass rushers. You can't skimp on pass rushers. All right. So I don't know necessarily if this means the end for Azeez Ojulari as a Giant. Now, I do know that there haven't been any talks with his agent, as far as I can tell, at any rate. I do get the sense that Ojulari would like to stay with the Giants, but here's the thing, folks. Some team is going to be allured by the fact that he's going to be 25 years old on his next birthday. He's got production behind him now. It's pretty decent production. And despite the fact that he has the injury history, which has really been the problem for Ojulari since he was drafted in the second round by the Giants in 2021, he still is an up-and-coming talent who really hasn't hit his ceiling. So, in retrospect, you look at the Lions, they needed a temporary solution, which they got in 32-year-old Zadarius Smith, because the Lions will get Aiden Hutchinson back probably next year. All right. The Cardinals, they got a young pass rusher. I think Browning, if I'm not mistaken, was 25 years old. So where the Falcons probably stood, they had, I think, Lorenzo Carter, former Giant, and I forget who their other pass rusher was, but I think they were dealing with some injuries there. I suspect they were looking for a third pass rusher, maybe didn't want to give up what the Giants were asking. So now, like I said, both guys remain with the Giants. Is it a bad thing? No, in the short term. Is it something that, the Giants are going to end up regretting, especially after seeing what happened last year with Saquon Barkley and Xavier McKinney? Well, we'll talk about that in the next segment, so don't go anywhere. Hey, Giant fans, remember our great partner, Ultimate Pro Football GM? Well, they're back and they've added an amazing new game mode I need to tell you about. The game that has you step into the shoes of a football franchise GM and lead it to glory has now a head coach career mode. So, on top of building your dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring coaching staff, now you also get to call offensive plays during games as well. Additionally, you'll dig the new tools you can work with, such as individual training cams and upgraded negotiation systems. So, this fun and realistic game just got a whole lot better. If you already have it installed, be sure to do an update so that you can try out the new mode. If you don't have it yet, download it right now. It's a must have for all football fans. I love it, and I know you will too. Ultimate Pro Football GM is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline. Play on the go as you want and when you want. And here's a special offer for Locked On fans. Use our promo code Locked On NFL in all caps inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. Make sure to get it, as this perk will jumpstart your play and give you an advantage that you'll want in creating a dynasty. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com. Again, that's ultimate-gm.com, or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. Hey, Giant fans, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. It's easy to win real money this football season on Prize Picks. Which players are going to go off? Which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money. And be sure to check out Prize Picks' weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts, like Taco Tuesday, when every Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So what are you waiting for? Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, and we are talking about the Giants' lack of activity at the NFL trade deadline. The Giants standing pat, not making any moves, not selling, not buying, standing pat. Which I didn't expect them to acquire anybody. Did I think they would move somebody? I thought Ojulari maybe, but I wasn't 100% sure that would happen. But anyway, let's talk about what happens next. All right. So again, on my X account, I see a lot of people saying, "Oh my God, the Giants made a mistake. Now they're going to let these guys walk away, like they did for Saquon Barkley, like they did for Xavier McKinney." Folks, let's hold off for a second here, because in the case of Darius Slayton and Azeez Ojulari, there is a possibility. It is not a slam dunk, but there is a possibility that the Giants could potentially get comp picks for 2026. All right. Now, obviously, it is not guaranteed. It's going to depend on how many free agents they sign versus how many they lose. It's going to depend on what kind of contracts these guys sign. You got to figure if a team wants to pay them big bucks, you've got to figure that, Slayton would probably be a starter. You got to figure that maybe Ojulari will probably see a nice chunk of playing time. But it all depends, because, acquisitions cancel things out. So here's maybe the thinking for Joe Schoen. All right. He could possibly be thinking, all right, you know what? If I have to make a trade in the draft to move up in the draft, maybe now I can recap or recoup, rather, I should say, picks that I might have to give up in, say, 2026. And I'm talking specifically about quarterbacks. So just hear me out on this. Let's say, for argument's sake, the Giants stay where they are. I think right now they're drafting 7th in the order. All right. And they have to trade up or to get the quarterback that they want. All right. Assuming that they want a quarterback next year, which I believe they're going to. The Giants will probably need to, given the projected picks they have, they will probably need to put together a package that will include picks from 2026 in addition to 2025 picks. So that's where potentially knowing, and they would know at that point, by the time the draft rolls around, they would have a good idea as to whether or not they're going to get additional comp picks for if they lose Slayton and Ojulari and whoever else they might lose in free agency. They could now bank on those picks and use them to trade up. So I think in 2026, I believe the Giants have all their 7 picks. So they could easily say, okay, let's say, for example, Carolina, they want to do a trade with Carolina. They can say, okay, Carolina, we're going to give you our 2025 first round pick, our 2025 fourth round pick, and our 2026 third round pick. Well, they know they're going to have a third round pick, but maybe, again, by the time the draft rolls around, they'll have a better idea and say, okay, you know what? We might get 2 third round picks because of comp picks. I know it's risky. It's been, I know a lot of people are like, look, I'd rather know for sure if we're going to have it and then play around with it. But these are the risks the team takes. Now, is it possible that the Giants could re-sign Ojulari? They have not, to my knowledge, had any discussions with his representation. He's represented by John Thornton of Rock Nation, same agent as Andrew Thomas, by the way. So it is possible they could offer him a deal if Ojulari is not looking for, an arm and a leg. Is he worthy of Brian Burns' numbers? Probably not. Is he worthy of, I guess what Zadarius Smith is making? I don't know. Possibly. Is he worthy of what Jonathan Cooper of Denver is making? A former 7th round pick who I believe signed a 4-year, I think it was a $60 million deal. That might be more in line with what Ojulari's value is going to be worth. All right. Because again, they have working in their favor the injury history. So I don't know necessarily that you can rule out the Giants re-signing Ojulari. I think it's going to depend. Now, again, some people will say, well, they've got so much invested financially in Burns and in Thibodeau, who, they're going to pick up his option year, his rookie option year. So why would they spend extra money on, another pass rusher? Folks, you can never have too many pass rushers. So I don't think you can use that argument and say, well, it's stupid for them to spend an arm and a leg on another pass rusher. All right. We have seen guys get banged up. All right. Thibodeau, obviously, on IR right now. Burns is hurting, so you want to have at least 3 deep so you can rotate, keep guys fresh. And that's what I think the Giants will look to do. I think if they lose Ojulari, it would be a big hole for them to fill, especially given some of the other needs that they have. But I don't know if right now I would necessarily say they're going to not be able to re-sign him. It's early, but just, my early gut feeling is don't necessarily think he's going to walk away. Slayton, yes, I do think Slayton will go to another team. I am not 100% convinced at this juncture that Ojulari is. But as I always say, money doesn't talk, it screams. So it is possible that he leaves, and we'll just have to see how that plays out. But the Giants, bottom line, did they do right by holding their water? Look, you don't want to give guys away. It's that simple. Now I know some of you are like, well, you take what you can get because beggars aren't in a position to be choosy. It does matter, folks. At the end of the day, it does matter because you want to have optimal draft picks in case you want to move up to get your quarterback. All right, coming up next, the Giants made somewhat of a surprising move by cutting cornerback Nick McLeod on Tuesday. I'll give you a little background as to why that move made sense after was thinking about it and where the Giants go from here. That's coming up right after this. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if they win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked on Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And coming up on the Locked on Giants podcast tomorrow, it's Crossover Thursday. Julie and Council of Locked on Panthers and I break down the game between the New York Giants and the Carolina Panthers that will be played in Munich this weekend. What are the key storylines and whatnot? My key storyline, spoiler alert, is this the last hurrah for quarterback Daniel Jones? So hope you will check that out. Julie and I, Julian's already in Germany, so we had a lively conversation about our respective teams, which are so alike in so many ways besides records, but check that out. All right. Let's talk about Nick McLeod. All right. The Giants today, meaning Tuesday, cut Nick McLeod. Kind of a surprise move at first because, McLeod is such a versatile cornerback, can play in the slot, he can play outside. He was also a pretty good special teams player for them. Actually, one of their core special team players last year and sort of this year as well. Now, from a cornerback perspective, McLeod wasn't, a world beater. So some of you, when I posted the news on X, you were like, oh, that's good. He stunk anyway. But the move wasn't necessarily made because he was good. It wasn't done to send any kind of message to the team. It was a pure financially driven move. All right. So before that move was made, the Giants had $1.166 million in cap space available. Folks, that's not enough to get the Giants through the rest of the season. It's just not. They were going to have to get money from someplace. And some of you are like, okay, well, what about Daniel Jones? Force him to take a pay cut. I'll explain why they didn't in a moment. They went with McLeod. All right. McLeod, if you remember, signed an RFA tender, an original tender at 1 year, and it was close to $3 million. I think it was actually like 2.9 something. By cutting McLeod, they saved $1.404 million. That should be enough to get them through the rest of the year. Should be. Now, for those of you who said, well, why don't they do something about Daniel Jones's contract? Folks, they can't. And if nothing else, for those of you who are screaming that they need to move on from Daniel Jones, this is your sign that that is in the works. Okay? Now, here's the thing. Daniel Jones has guaranteed money this year, which is the whole reason why, even if the Giants had drafted a quarterback this past spring, that's why the Giants were not going to cut him. They owed him guaranteed money. If you go to Daniel Jones at this point and you say, hey, Daniel, we need you to take a pay cut or we need you to restructure, you got to make sure that Daniel gets the equivalent of whatever the guaranteed money he is owed this year, the full amount, which means you got to go through cap gymnastics, push money into later years where if you're planning to get rid of him after this year, and it does look like that's going to be the case, now you've just choked up your cap even further. So, folks, there was just no way the Giants were going to go to Daniel Jones and ask him to take a pay cut or restructure him. And again, for those of you who are like, well, when are they going to get rid of him? The mere fact that they're not touching his contract. This is like Kenny Golladay all over again. I don't know if you guys remember, but a few years ago, the Giants basically had to go through the season with Kenny Galladay's huge contract on their books, they didn't touch it because they knew they were going to move on from him after the season. Same situation now with Jones. All right. Jones is not solely to blame for what has gone wrong with the Giants 2024 season, but he hasn't played above the X's and O's, which is why they're going to probably go in a different direction in the offseason. Now, whether they trade him, whether they look to cut him, I don't know what their plan is. I can't imagine they're going to trade that contract. Although they might, who knows? Maybe somebody who's quarterback desperate, who's further down on the depth chart, will take him and rework the contract the last 2 years of his deal. Possibility, but the McLeod move was purely financial. All right. The Giants had wanted McLeod to take a pay cut at the start of the season, but because there were some injuries at the cornerback position, McLeod kind of had the leverage. The Giants had to grin and bear it. Now, supposedly, the cornerback group is getting healthier. You know, they had injuries with Adoree Jackson. Trey Hawkins was banged up. You know, Cordell Flott was banged up. Those guys are healthy again. And also you have the bye coming up after this weekend, which further gives some, you know, hope that some of these banged up guys will get even healthier. So it was purely a financial move. They move on. And oh, by the way, they got to redo that cornerback room next year anyhow, because the depth is just, you know, they can only get by so far with what they've got there. And, you know, it's funny. I knew it wasn't going to happen, but Tre'Davious White was on the trade block. He ended up getting traded. I think he was initially with the Rams, and I can't remember who he got traded to, but he got traded. And that was, you know, I knew it wasn't going to happen. I said, gosh, you know, if the Giants really needed a cornerback, wouldn't it be something if after failing to sign him, they made a trade for him? But the Giants aren't one cornerback away. They can't be giving up draft capital when they potentially are going to be looking for a quarterback next spring. So here we are, folks. You know, and then there's one last thing I'll mention. John Mara, you know, whether you agree with this or not, he prefers that the Giants put the best possible product on the field. And I know you guys are probably saying, well, not this year. This year's product is not nowhere close to being the best. And you'd be right. But, you know, in moving guys around, just going back to the trade, you know, moving away from Slayton, who's contributed, moving away from, you know, Ojulari, you know, in a way that helps them because those are amongst their best players, if you will. So John Mara, you know, frustrated. I happened to see him at halftime during the Washington game, and he was, you know, pacing back and forth. You could see the smoke coming out of his ears because he wasn't happy with how things are going. But, you know, look, Giants have a lot of work to do in the offseason. I think we can all agree on that. They've got a lot of, you know, rebuilding to do at certain positions. The trade deadline is in the books. It is what it is. Now, Joe Schoen, it's your move. What are you going to do after the season? How are you going to fix this mess that has basically developed after adding key talent on the offensive line, after adding a number one receiver, Malik Neighbors, after upgrading the pass rush? What are you going to do to fix it? And how far off is this team from getting back on track? All right, Giant fans, that's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Giants. Again, don't forget to tune in tomorrow. It will be Crossover Thursday, and I will see you then.